So joining us today are a number of users that I mentioned. And at first, I think we're going to start with Mark Owens. Mark is an alfalfa farmer in the U.S. state of Oregon. And he's also serving his first term as an elected representative in the Oregon State Legislature. And Mark, we thought we should start with you because as a farmer, you're experiencing the effects firsthand of water scarcity in Eastern Oregon. And as an elected official, you're representing farmers too. Can you tell us a little of your personal experience using OpenET and how you've used it to reduce applied water and how it's informing your work on the farm, and then more regionally, even your statewide scale as a politician? Oh, yes.
Stand by for commercial, please.
We have a video that shows you first a little closer hand where Mark is coming from in Eastern Oregon.
We're under a drought in most of the West contiguously. The climate is changing. Summers are getting longer, it's getting hotter, it's getting drier, we're getting less precipitation. So I think there's a growing awareness in all of the West that we have to use significantly less water. So agriculture has to figure out how to get as much per drop of water as they can. I started to try to understand evapotranspiration when we collectively started trying to figure out, can I put less water on my fields and still yield the same amount or more? I go online and I can pull up the evapotranspiration numbers. I compare the amount of water that I apply daily, weekly, probably monthly, compared to what OpenET says. And I can see if I'm over applying or under applying. So if I put on more water than evapotranspiration I already have in my bank, I can shut off for a couple of days. That means we could use about 25% less water and still produce the same amount of crop, which means a lot if you're putting out several million gallons of water a day.
Go for it, Mark.
I'm going to stand a little bit just because I feel better. So good morning. Welcome to Stockholm. I hope your journey was good. Ours was a little interesting. At 1:30 this morning, I wasn't sure if we were going to be here. I'm not sure why Maurice would want to start with a politician because I'm supposed to limit myself to 5 minutes. But that being said, I must start with my adventure or journey into water and how I became a farmer that used OpenET and a policymaker that wants to support it. So in May 2026, the Water Resource Department of Oregon came into my basin in Southeast Oregon, said, hey, we might have made a mistake. We might have overappropriated your basin. They showed us a blue bar graph. On that blue bar graph, it showed from 1968 Robinson study, the amount of recharge that comes into our basin, about 270,000 acre feet. Of that, about 89,200 acre feet are used for springs and streams, leaving a remainder of approximately 170,000 acre feet. They'd appropriated at that time around 270,000 acre feet. So I asked myself why. It frustrated me, made me concerned. How could this happen? It must be a one-off. Must have only happened in the Harney Basin in Southeast Oregon. These were rural, only have a couple thousand people. They weren't paying attention. The more I looked, the more I realized, hey, that's not true. It happened in Oregon before, continued to happen in Oregon. It's happening across the rest of the 17 Western states, and probably in a community or basin or region of yours. So that started, I guess, a progression in my life. I was a first generation farmer. I never left a farm, but I actually got kind of pissed off. What can we do about this? So it took myself and manifested itself in two different directions. How can we stop this from happening at the state level? And how can we work with communities like myself and mine to figure out how we can get sustainable? So my goal right now is to make sure every basin in Oregon can understand their water balance overlaid with what's been appropriated. The biggest data gap that we found was actually consumptive use, not going off paper water, because we all know that's just as good as the paper it's written on. What is actually being used? And that's where OpenET comes in. OpenET can help create those water balances and budgets in real time. In Oregon, water is a public resource managed by the state. But if it's a public resource, shouldn't the public know how we're using that water, what we're applying? I say yes. So in 2021, as the state representative, we took forward a package that I championed in order to make the Water Resource Department in the state of Oregon team up with USGS and come up with those water balances and those water budgets. And actually show with OpenET historical record of what has been used and what is currently being used. So the public can understand that water balance and budget, and so can the agriculture community. So we can start to figure out how we can manage the water better. So that'll be the first, we're just actually starting that. They started sending the contract to USGS and we're going to start working through that. So that's a good thing. So that's how we'll figure out how we can stop the, lack of a better term, the blood flow. These people know that we are bleeding out in 17 Western states and that blood is water. Now, personally, what does that mean to my community? What does that mean to me as a farmer? So also in 2015, we started a water collaborative. As the state said they would start to do a more comprehensive groundwater study, we started discussing because it was clear and evident that we had to use less water and we were over appropriated. So what can we do about that? So we started working with many host of solutions on how we can use less water as an agricultural community. And a lot of those are going to rely on open evapotranspiration. One of them will be a water market share, a declining share program that we start out with a basis and we start reducing as we go through a period of time. There's a lot of water regulation and policy in Oregon, but there's not a lot of accountability or tools in order for the public to understand. So as an agriculture community, when I come forward and I ask for flexibility in how to use water, there should be an expectation. They'll also be transparent that we're meeting those needs, the desires, and actually reducing what we're due. That's where OpenET comes in. So OpenET can look at my farms, my fields, and if I say I'm going to use 3% less water that year on a declining share, everybody should be able to know. They should be able to look back on a period of record and say, hey, he's meeting his goal. So it's going to be very important in a water market. Also, we're looking at a conservation reserve enhancement program for groundwater. There's been a couple successful in the Western states, one in Colorado or two in Colorado and others. So if we're going to use public money to dry up water, a match between federal and state, once again, we got to be transparent. We got to make sure that if we're doing a water market or a CREP program, excuse me, that we're actually drying the water up. How can we do that now? We can do that with OpenET. So if we're using a public resource, the public should have the ability to see the information of the water that's not being applied. So it'd be a voluntary cancellation of a water rate. What does it mean to my own water management on my own farm? So the groundwater study that I talked about just got published in April of this year, and it shows that in our basin, there were about 110,000 acre feet over appropriated. We only use about 135 to 145,000 acre feet of groundwater in the basin. It's a closed basin. There's no access to any rivers. We're in the dry part of Southeast Oregon, 8 to 10 inches of rainfall, 4,200 foot. There's no Columbia River that we're going to tap into. There's no dam that we're going to put in. Not saying that we should, but we're going to have to figure out how to become sustainable. So with evapotranspiration, we've designed sprinkler system using low elevation spray applications where we reduced our water use by 20%. We've reduced our power use by 25%. We started to figure out how to do more with less. Conservation through efficiencies without reduction of yield. That's the first step. We work with the agricultural community to design systems to match the water that we need. So every Monday I get together with my 7 and 9 employees. We have 2 people that are in charge of irrigation. We do about 4,000 acres. We actually look at OpenET. We look at they have a draft or a beta that actually will forecast OpenET for the next 7 days in my area. So we look at what the water crop demand is going to be. We know what we're applying and we talk. How many days can we irrigate this week? How many days should we irrigate this week? And we'll actually shut down for 1 or 2 days, because most of the time an irrigation system is designed for peak evapotranspiration in the summer. So the areas where you can really start to reduce is during crop scheduling or when it's cooler in the spring and fall. So we go through that exercise every Monday to figure out how we're going to use less water. And we start talking about different crops, different things. So it's an evolving education process in our community and how we do it. So I represent farmers and ranchers. I represent 37% of the southeast corner of the state. It's mostly ag. This does make ag nervous, folks. It does. We have to have some grace with our agriculture community to work through this. We need to make sure that we ground truth it with more eddy covariance stations. We got to make sure there's a common understanding that the information here is accurate. I'm there. One of those flux towers was in one of my alfalfa pivots. but some of my other agricultural people across the Western states, it's not there. But I'll also share with you, I believe the vast majority, way up in the upper 90s, of farmers and ranchers use water within their rate and duty. They do. And I tell them, if you do that, let's show that to the public. Let's make sure people understand that OpenET can do that. I say, if you're not, stop. We're not going to have any tolerance for those that are using more than what they have. And the reality is we're going to have to use less. I probably spoke for over my 5 minutes, so I'm going to hand it back over to Maurice.
Thank you very much, Mark. Really appreciate your leadership, and the picture that you painted is a picture that we see time and time and time again across the Western US, and I'm sure in many other parts of the world. We want to go next to another farmer, Brett Baker. Brett is from California's Sacramento San Joaquin Delta. That delta is a critical hub for California's water infrastructure. It's also a vibrant farming region and a vital ecosystem. Now, like other irrigators in the region, Brett, you have to report your water use. And as an attorney, you also help other farmers and water districts in that process. Could you give us an idea of the status of farmers using OpenET to report their water use to the state of California, and how farmers are reacting to this new compliance system that uses OpenET? Oh, after the video.
Is this thing on? Is this on? Yeah. We have been farming on this piece of dirt since the 1850s, and we are proud stewards of this land. As a farmer by nature, you're an environmentalist. Your well-being is tied to the well-being of the plants and wildlife that depend on the same resources that you do.
The Delta is 750,000 acres, roughly the size of the state of Rhode Island, the largest estuary on the west coast of the North and South Hemisphere. The last major drought, it became abundantly clear that we didn't have sufficient data to make critical decisions about how to manage in shortage circumstances.
Measuring water in the Delta has been a fool's errand. Measuring just the applied water or diverted water doesn't give you the full picture.
Instead of putting a meter on every diversion, it just made sense to look at something that was less invasive, less expensive. So OpenET is a game changer for the Delta because it will give us real-time information that has a high degree of credibility.
OpenET, it gives us a bird's eye view of what's actually going on the ground in real time. It provides an opportunity to get more relevant data. There will be ways to use this information going forward that will benefit everybody, not just in the state of California, but I believe throughout the Western United States and beyond.
Excellent. So I'm that fool, and that's been my errand for the last decade or so. First, before we get to that, I want to tell you a little bit about where I come from and why our hydrology and our situation makes for a perfect marriage between OpenET and Delta water users. So the 750,000 acres Michael George, our Delta Water Master, was talking about is a statutorily defined region in the state of California, the Sacramento River Delta. And I didn't convert that to hectares. It's about 1,000 square miles. And the majority of that is our islands and tracts. And they were reclaimed about the time began being reclaimed about the time California began statehood in the middle of the 1800s, and were largely reclaimed by about 1900. And one of the unique things about our situation as juxtaposed to the rest of our state is our problem isn't water scarcity so much as we generally have too much water. And so we have artificially created drainage systems in our islands, and we discharge water out back into the channel to keep our root zone oxygenated and have opportunity to make productive agriculture or cultivate that land. It was, generally speaking, in a state of nature, a freshwater tidal estuary, marsh, whatever word you prefer. And so in our situation, we cannot store water. We have to get rid of water continually. Our two biggest concerns are floods, and then the rest of the state is concerned about drought in California. So we are continually discharging water back into the channel. When we apply water, it is either percolated back into the groundwater, evaporated by the plant, or discharged back in the channel. So it just makes sense that OpenET and the relevant measure for our water use in the Delta is consumptive use for those reasons. And so in about 2009, we passed a piece of legislation in the state of California called the Delta Reform Act, which required for the first time that Delta water users meter or report their water use. So we did this using an equation and localized weather data. We put in some weather stations and we began reporting our water use based on calculation. And throughout that period of time, I would continually, find myself at my wit's end. We installed some water meters, some physical measuring devices, which are extremely costly, difficult to maintain. And worst of all, they give you bad data and they lose a lot of data. So I would constantly find myself on the side of the levee, replacing a battery or getting a sensor to work and looking up and saying, someone help me, please. And in about 2019, OpenET showed up and Michael George introduced us, and we started talking about developing and using the program to report and measure water use in the Delta. And so we have embarked on an effort to build an API. We built an app for that, basically, right? So we've used ArcGIS, mapped out our places of use, corresponded to a water right, a point of diversion, and an identifier. And so our app will take that spatial data, query OpenET, get the data back for us, and we'll have an auto-populator filled out report. So we can get this data back to the regulators and the water system managers in our state. One other thing about the Delta that I should have mentioned at the very beginning is there are two large diversions in our Delta. The two largest diversions are the state and Central Valley water projects. We have the federal government and the state government both taking water out of the Delta, and they rely on, as I said, consumptive use. They've used a model that they created in the 50s and 60s when the projects came online to calculate Delta consumptive use, net Delta outflow index, or in net Delta island consumptive use. And that algorithm has remained largely unchanged since the 50s and 60s. It has been updated. There are a few improvements that have been made, but by and large, it's pretty rudimentary. And just for example, if we have measured rainfall at Fire Station 4 in Stockton, we consider that it rained in the entire Delta, and that will cancel out the consumptive use for 4 days thereafter. Any measurable rainfall. So anyhow, it's not a very good equation. So we're excited about this opportunity. It does present us an ability to give uniform data to the regulators and folks operating the system, and more timely data. And I think that those two things coupled make that increase the value, the utility of that data extremely, because currently we were looking at water under the bridge. We were reporting last year's data at best. So we've had some legislative changes. We're going to change our reporting period from an annual year to our water year, which is September 30th to October 1st every year. And we're going to be able to give more timely, relevant data to the folks making decisions on how that system's operated. And I'm hopeful that that will not only allow for the continued productivity of my region and my water users and my clients and my family's farm, but also improve the health of the ecosystem and allow for better management of the system overall, because we'll have more informed decisions. So that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brett. It's been a real treat to work with you and the other Delta water agencies, and it's great to hear the story from your side of the platform.
since I have you all here, I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you. And it's a real honor to be here. And yeah, fellow water warriors, I really appreciate that opportunity. I want to take the moment to say that. Thank you.
Aaron. Another place that OpenET is being used is in the high elevation valleys of the U.S. state of Colorado. It's a very different setting from California's Delta region. And we would like to show you a video of a rancher from Colorado.
My name is Paul Bruchet. I'm a rancher just outside of Kremlin, Colorado. We run a cow-calf operation, raise hay, irrigate out of 3 different water resources. We also operate a guided fly fishing business to help supplement income and work the ranch as a family. Water to our operation means everything. We rolled through the drought of the early 2000s in the headwaters, learned some lessons there, which is largely why my family and my neighbors are as engaged as we are with water. We are truth testing different forms of measuring water used for irrigation on high altitude perennials. We are studying the recovery of those crops after having different forms of treatment to them, the full season curtailment, and then a split season where the producer was allowed to irrigate until June 15th and then required to shut off for the remainder of the season. I'm excited to continue to learn about the information and data gathered by OpenET. I'm excited to truth test that against many of the other forms and mechanisms that we have working. With OpenET, it completely changes our ability to understand what's going on within our fields. Water is the lifeblood of the West, and we have to figure out how to do more or the same with less. The more that we have the science and the data, the more that we'll be able to make good decisions.
Now with us today, we have Aaron Derwingson, who is a water project manager for the Nature Conservancy, and he's been working with Paul Bruchet, who you saw in the video, and a number of other ranchers in Colorado. Now, Aaron, you've been working with these ranchers and the university partners to determine how ranchers in Colorado can conserve water while minimizing impacts on their pastures' health and their long-term yield and economic survival. Could you tell us a little bit about this study to incorporate that's and why it's important to Colorado and beyond, and how OpenET is helping?
Yeah, thanks, Maurice, and thanks everybody for being here and for the opportunity to share our story. And Paul couldn't be here, but he sends his greetings, and y'all are stuck with me. But I think in terms of the importance, water scarcity is a huge issue for Colorado. It's a huge issue for the other 6 states and the country of Mexico that share in the resource. 40 million people, some 5 million acres of irrigated ag land, and then a vast and interconnected ecosystem, all at incredible risk right now because the Colorado River is tanking. If you haven't seen the news in the last week, really, it's at a very, very precipitous place. Flows have dropped some 20% since 2000, and they're forecasted to decline another 10 to 40% by 2050. The reservoirs in the basin have plummeted to dangerously low levels. They're as low as they've ever been since they were first being filled. And the recent estimate is that they need to cut back 2 to 4 million acre feet in the basin just to stabilize the system where it's at now. I think this is a savvy crowd, right? So an acre foot is about how much water you need for 2 average households for a year. Cutting back 2 to 4 million acre feet in the basin is a massive amount of water. The whole basin uses about 12.5 million acre feet right now. And so it's a monumental task, and it's going to affect everything from food production that Paul thinks about, to hydropower, to water availability to cities, to river flows for endangered fish and other wildlife that depend on those riparian ecosystems. And so we've got our work cut out for us, and the work with ag is especially important, right? Ag in the basin, like most water scarce regions, is the bulk of the water use. It's about 80 to 85% of the use in the basin for growing food and fiber. And so any solution is going to significantly involve ag. And that's sort of where the easy part ends, right? And what that solution needs to look like is the real challenge and opportunity that we're facing, right? Again, because it's so interconnected with food, with local and regional economies, And for us, stream flows and wildlife habitat, and in a place like Colorado, and what you saw where Paul and his neighbors ranch, wildlife habitat and irrigated ag are really intertwined. And so we have to be really thoughtful about what that reduction looks like in ag. And that's really the work that I do at TNC, that we do with Paul and others, is to tackle that challenge, right? Build partners with ag water users, with the folks that are managing that resource day in, day out, and have that knowledge, combine it with resources from universities and other partners, and develop, test, and then share these, creative water conservation strategies that can help us get by in a water limited system, but do it in a way that allows us to thrive and allows for productive ag and allows for healthy communities and a healthy environment. And then over the last 10 years, we've been doing dozens of different experiments, small scale, large scale, working with different partners. But the study that Paul mentioned that we're doing with OpenET and others, it's really, I think, probably our most ambitious, or certainly our most comprehensive effort to date, to really think about how do we tackle all of those interrelated issues around reducing ag water use. It's a 4-year study. It's set up as a side-by-side comparison where we have the treatment fields that Paul mentioned that have some form of reduced irrigation, and then reference fields that get, business as usual. And between the two, we're comparing water use and water savings, forage quality, forage quantity, agronomics, wildlife habitat, impact on stream flows, really trying to get that comprehensive picture of what does this mean for each individual parcel, the whole community, and the river itself. Our kind of 3 main questions are, how can we measure water use accurately and at scale, which is where OpenET comes in. And then what are the agronomic impacts of reduced water use, and how can we help producers make informed decisions about how to manage this increasingly limited resource? And then for the basin and for the Nature Conservancy, we want to better understand, how does that water conservation impact wildlife habitat and river flows? And really, this kind of comprehensive research study, it's only possible thanks to all the partners involved. Paul's really one of the champions of the project, but he's got 9 other families that he's recruited to join in this effort. They've put about 1,200 acres of land into the program, allowed researchers from 3 different universities to crawl all over the field and measure the grass and put equipment in. And then those partners themselves that are doing the research and providing the data. And OpenET is just really a core component of this work to understand water use, right? If we didn't have OpenET and we couldn't create these pictures like this, we'd be left with sort of the traditional options, which rely very heavily on assumptions. If you were going to go through Colorado right now and estimate water use on these fields, you would basically you'd be guessing. You'd be doing informed guessing and well-reasoned guessing, but you'd be guessing. You'd be guessing at how much water they divert. You'd be guessing at what they efficiency is to get it to the field, the efficiency it gets applied with, and you'd be guessing at what the crops use. Okay. And if we wanted an alternative that wasn't OpenET, we'd be out there doing a whole water balance, right? We would be putting tons of equipment on these fields all the way down in the soil, measuring all the water applied, where it goes back to the river in 50 different locations. And I know a lot of ranchers, but I don't know anyone who wants to sign up for that level of instrumentation on their field, right? And so the ability to have something like OpenET that lets us get those estimates at scale, cost effectively, it's huge, right? And I think this picture shows, it shows the results from our fields, right? And shows the water use compared to previous years, right? And so we have the treatment fields that you can see in red. That's where the water use is lower. And you can see the reference field there in blue, right? And so that gives us a very visual piece. But I think the other really important part that we've learned in this project is how this can build trust in the tool from our ag partners, right? Because they can look at that field and they can align what they see with what they know. And a quick story you can see on that top treatment one where it says T2, you can see a little bit of blue bleeding into the red, right? And what happened is that field wasn't supposed to get irrigated, but because of changes in management that come along with it, one of the ditches blew out and it spread a bunch of water onto the field that wasn't supposed to get it. And you can see that clearly, right? So you can see this is, maybe happened for 2-3 weeks on there. And that lets Paul and his neighbors again see like, well, hey, this is what I know from my management, and it aligns with what I'm seeing. And it builds more trust in the tool than, seeing some, different engineering spreadsheets. I think the last thing I want to say is the importance of getting to scale, because this project matters for this part of the Colorado River. It matters for this community in Kremling. But if we don't figure out how to tackle this problem at the whole scale of the basin, then that's where we're really lost and where the real opportunity is, right? And in the basin, we basically have a massive water management challenge, right? And the old saying, you can't manage what you can't measure. And this is going to be, I think, one of the most important tools we have to do that measurement at scale that's going to allow for that improved water management. And then success is going to take that tool coming together with folks like Paul and his neighbors, other ag leaders, like Mark and Brett, that are willing to experiment and try something new with public funding, with philanthropy. All that's going to have to come together for a path to make change at a scale for places like the Colorado River Basin. But really excited to share this story because I think this is exactly how we start and where we grow from. Thanks, Maurice.
Yeah, Aaron, very glad that you could be here. We're glad to have Paul on the video, but I think the combination of you, the university groups, and the farmers is exactly the kind of illustrates exactly the kind of collaboration that is going to help us address this repeated challenge. Now, OpenET has certainly been developed with irrigated agriculture in mind, but it also has applications beyond irrigated agriculture. So I want to introduce Elvy Barton. Elvy works with the Salt River Project and is a forest, helps to guide their forest management. And first we have a video that describes a little bit about the setting where Elvy works.
We are in the East Clear Creek watershed. This is one of our most at-risk watersheds because our dam here is completely surrounded by ponderosa pine forest that are in an unhealthy state. With increasing temperatures, we're having increasing variability with droughts, and unhealthy forest has fuel for large catastrophic wildfires. So we adopted a 2035 goal to support 500,000 acres of forest thinning. Now, this is unprecedented since no utility in the United States has taken on a forest health goal. It's going to take a lot of science and tech and data. And so when we begin our forest thinning projects, the trees will become more drought tolerant. OpenET will help us have data to inform how our forest thinning projects are reacting to those climate change impacts that we're seeing today.
Elvy, the Salt River Project provides water and energy to 2.5 million people in the greater Phoenix metropolitan area in Arizona. Now, I was wondering if you could drill down a little bit and tell us a little bit about how OpenET is helping you understand the connections between forest health and how you are using this data.
Thank you, Maurice. And thank you everyone for being here in person and online. So as Maurice mentioned, I work for the Salt River Project, which is a U.S. Bureau of Reclamation project. Our organization manages and operates 7 dams and reservoirs and delivers water to 2.5 million residents. Now, the water that we deliver every day derives from an 8.3 million acres on 3 different watersheds. And those watersheds are at high risk for catastrophic wildfire due to lack of management of our forest and overgrowth. So SRP, my organization, is engaged with a lot of partners to reduce the dense material in our forest through forest thinning projects. And by reducing the dense vegetation, you also reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire and the potential impacts that it not only has on our water supplies, the water quality, but also the water infrastructure that we use to deliver the water. Now, one of the questions I always get asked about forest management projects is, can you quantify the water benefits associated with forest thinning projects? And now with OpenET, we can. So we know that OpenET has the view data for the Western United States, and you can zoom in to any location. And the first place I look at is the projects that we are planning on operating on. This gives us at least the baseline conditions related to evapotranspiration that we can measure on the ground. The second way I use the OpenET is that when projects are actually implemented on the ground, we can now compare the thinned version of the forest to its previous existing conditions, and you can measure the amount of ET change that has happened between the baseline conditions and the treated conditions. And then the third way that I use OpenET data is that now I can monitor over long term. I can look from year to year and look at the ET changes that have occurred over those years. I can also look at how the vegetation is regrowing and how that also impacts the changes in evapotranspiration. So now that I have those three different ways of using OpenET data, I also have a way to quantify how my forest treatments are going to be impacting the water budget, which really is very helpful for not only regulatory agencies, but when we are also working with our partners and applying for grants, I now have a tool that I can use that actually measures quantified water benefits and not just making assumptions and guesses at what the water benefits really are. So this has been a really life-changing definite tool in order for us to look at landscape scale restoration and how it does impact the different water budgets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elvy. And I'm convinced that your experiences there in the forest of Northern Arizona are going to be valuable in other places and across the world. After living through fires and smoke in New Mexico this year, I'm especially attuned to the issues of forest management and the new challenges that climate change is forcing us to deal with there. Now, we are mostly have been working in the United States, but we are certainly beginning to explore what OpenET might provide in other places. And beginning that exploration, I want to introduce Anderson Ruhoff. Now, Anderson has actually been a very important member of our technical team, even though he sits in Brazil. He and his team have been instrumental in programming one of the algorithms, one of the ET estimation methods into the platform. And I know Anderson is also interested in applying OpenET in Brazil. And so Anderson, thank you for all your support and your help. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit about how your interest in expanding OpenET and how you see it being used in Brazil.
Morning. Thanks for the introduction, Maurice. It's honored to be here. And as Maurice told, I'm from Brazil. In 2019, I was in the US, and I had the opportunity to meet Gabriel, Robin, Maurice, and other OpenET members. And since then, I'm working with them to program some of the models, and so they are using in the US, but we are also using some of the models in Brazil. So Brazil, as you know, is one of the largest crop producers in the world. Is investing a lot in technology to increase productivity, and there is a lot of efforts as well from the Brazilian Water Agency to monitor agriculture. But there are also several issues, and one of the issues is that agriculture and cropland is expanding towards the Amazon, and it's causing some changes in a hydrological cycle. As you know, so large parts of Brazil have 4, 5, 6 months of a dry season, so it's a less reduced reduced precipitation rates, and basically there are large areas in Brazil with irrigation, and basically when the cropland expands towards the rainforest or when deforestation happens, what is basically happening is that that we see some changes in evapotranspiration rates. Basically, it reduces around 1 to 1.5 millimeter per day during the dry season. It isn't that much, 1 millimeter, but if you accumulate this amount over millions of square kilometers and during 6 months, for instance, it is a lot, and it's causing some reduction in water availability, water precipitation that is affecting not only the cropland areas, but also large areas in the country that produces energy based on hydropower and urban supply. And in addition, we are also seeing drought occurrences and drought intensification in Brazil, even with vast reserves of fresh water. So basically, we are using OpenET models to track the impacts of deforestation on the water cycle, and of course, to monitor water use in agriculture. And OpenET data is not only needed in the US, but also abroad in countries where we see cropland expansion and deforestation. And it's a great tool to get a sense or to monitor how the hydrological cycle is evolving. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Anderson, and thank you all the panelists. It is inspiring to hear your stories, and it's very exciting to see the merger of a technology building on the work of decades of hundreds, if not thousands of people and satellite imagery processing, but bringing that to the ground in special places to solve the unique local issues. So with that, we have the rest of the time allotted to questions and answers.